The sun blazed down on Interstate 10 as Delaney Voss gripped the steering wheel of her rented Chevrolet Tahoe. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, forming mirages that danced in front of her tires. Cedar Ridge County sprawled quietly around her, a seemingly ordinary patch of East Texas dotted with sparse trees and low hills. But Delaney was no ordinary traveler. Officially, she was on administrative leave from the FBI, recovering from injuries sustained during a high-profile Chicago bust. Unofficially, she was here because of her brother, Ronan. Earlier that day, Ronan had called her in distress. A local deputy, Officer Harlon Quill, had seized cash from him under the pretense of civil asset forfeiture. Ronan hadn't been speeding. He hadn't been drinking. He had simply driven through Cedar Ridge with a car deemed too nice for a young black man. The cash, meant for tuition, had vanished. Delaney had researched the incident. No reports existed. The only evidence was the citation photo Ronan had snapped. Harlon Quill. She wasn't seeking revenge, not yet. She was here to investigate. Was Quill a rogue officer or a symptom of something larger? Disguised in civilian clothing and driving a rental with out-of-state plates, Delaney kept her hands steady on the wheel, a hidden dashcam recording every inch of the vehicle. As she drove, she spotted the patrol cruiser lurking behind a billboard advertising Big Earl's BBQ. Its prow seemed shark-like, waiting for prey. The cruiser merged onto the highway, closing in aggressively. Delaney felt the prickle at the base of her neck but remained calm. Then the lights flashed and the siren chirped once, brief and menacing. She pulled to the gravel shoulder, windows down, hands visible. Quill, a thick-necked, heavy-set man, approached, his hand on the grip of his service weapon, teeth clenched over a toothpick. He didn't greet her. He didn't ask for identification. He simply leaned in, asserting control. Delaney remained calm, stating facts, citing speed limits, challenging his assumptions without raising her voice. Quill's smile vanished. He became violent, a predator exposed. He ordered her out, claiming probable cause to search for drugs. Delaney knew the law better than he did. Slowly, deliberately, she complied. As she stepped onto the gravel, Quill crowded her, hands intrusive during a pat-down, attempting to assert dominance. She kept her composure, letting him overreach, recording every violation. When she revealed her badge, identifying herself as a federal agent, Quill laughed, disbelief and amusement flickering across his face. Yet the amusement ended when she calmly stated her credentials, noting a silent alarm and GPS tracking. His instinct to dominate collided with her unshakable authority. Quill drew his Glock, aiming at her chest. Delaney froze, hand inching toward her bag. Time seemed to stretch. She smiled, not of submission, but of a trap closing. He lunged. She countered with expert precision, redirecting his force, disarming his advantage without drawing her weapon. The air shifted as a convoy of black Suburbans tore onto the highway, an FBI helicopter descending, rotors churning dust and debris. Red laser dots pinpointed Quill. Voices boomed, "Drop the weapon!" Quill hesitated, overwhelmed by the sudden manifestation of authority he hadn't anticipated. Slowly he lowered his gun, complying under the gaze of trained agents. Delaney approached, kicking his weapon out of reach, and ordered him onto the ground. The tactical team secured him quickly, zip ties cinching tight. Special Agent Preston Vale, her partner, gripped Quill, whispering advice laced with dark humor. Delaney retrieved her badge, showing him the truth inches from his face. Quill could only shake his head. She had won. Cedar Ridge's corrupt kingpin, Harlon Quill, was subdued, and the first stones of a long domino chain had fallen. Justice, precise and calculated, had arrived. The following hours unfolded like a controlled demolition. Delaney stayed alert as her team moved through the Cedar Ridge police station. Boxes of evidence were bagged and tagged. Computers were seized. Every deputy who had turned a blind eye watched, powerless, as their fortress was dismantled. Quill sat handcuffed in Interrogation Room B, slumped over the table, the weight of his choices pressing down. Delaney entered, carrying a thick folder, tossing it onto the table with a measured thump. Her eyes didn't waver. "Water?" she offered. Quill's gaze flickered with hope, but it died quickly when he remembered the damage he had caused, the innocent people he had terrorized, including college students and traveling contractors. Delaney opened a photo. Quill with a cash-bought fishing boat, ill-gotten gains from the very people he had abused. He swallowed, trembling, seeking excuses. Delaney didn't move. She let the silence stretch, each second hammering home the reality. Quill had choices, and every choice had consequences. She pulled out a recorder and placed it on the table. The patrol car's dash cam, thought to be malfunctioning, had captured every word, every laugh, every lie. Quill's face turned pale. He remembered calling Sheriff Declan Hale before stopping Delaney, scheming to shake her down. The weight of conspiracy, extortion, and armed abuse under color of law bore down. He attempted rationalization, claiming he followed orders, but Delaney's gaze, unwavering and cold, dismantled each excuse. She offered him a deal, cooperation in exchange for protection. Quill's shoulders sagged, realization settling in. He was no longer a king in a county built on fear. He was merely a witness. Outside, the operation escalated. A helicopter hovered overhead. Agents moved with precision, securing the perimeter, a testament to federal authority. Cedar Ridge's corrupt network was being dismantled systematically. The local sheriff, Hale, was already feeling the shift. Delaney had set the first pieces in motion, and nothing in his kingdom of fear would survive. Inside the station, Quill began to spill the details. Delaney listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally letting silence force him to confront his own complicity. She knew the strategy well. The rats would turn on each other once the ship started sinking. Every revelation was another match lit in the room, exposing decades of corruption, abuse, and theft. By nightfall, Quill had confessed nearly everything. Delaney's team secured files, evidence, and testimonies, ensuring no loophole remained. The Cedar Ridge empire built on fear, intimidation, and stolen wealth was collapsing. Delaney stepped outside briefly, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the parking lot. Traffic moved freely on the highway now, no predators lurking, no speed traps set to rob the unsuspecting. She exhaled, a mixture of relief and resolve filling her lungs. The dominoes had begun falling, and justice, precise and deliberate, had taken the first concrete steps into the quiet Texas night. Morning light spilled into Quill's cell at USP Beaumont, a fortress of concrete and isolation. The hum of the facility, punctuated by distant shouts and the metallic clank of doors, was constant, oppressive. Quill's eyes tracked the tiny slit window, the outside world reduced to a thin strip of sky. Every day was a mirror of consequences. The realization that his badge, once a symbol of power, had become a tool of his own undoing. Officer Ronin, professional and unwavering, slid a manila envelope through the slot, a simple act that underscored the bitter irony. Quill, who had mocked young black officers for their discipline, was now subject to it. Inside the envelope was mundane correspondence, yet it carried the weight of personal devastation. Quill's wife, Valeria, had filed for divorce. His children's lives were being uprooted. The note clipped to the paperwork was mercilessly honest, detailing the social fallout and isolation his actions had caused. Quill sank onto the lumpy mattress, curling toward the wall, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and despair. Meanwhile, in Cedar Ridge, Delaney Voss oversaw the systematic transformation of the county's law enforcement. The old sheriff's department had been repainted, Hale's name erased from signage. The interim sheriff, Kira Quill, a former Texas Ranger, enforced a zero-tolerance approach to corruption. Delaney inspected the scene, her eyes scanning every corner. There were no shortcuts, no symbolic gestures. Accountability was being embedded into policy. Quill's misdeeds had triggered a domino effect, exposing financial malfeasance, illegal asset seizures, and systemic abuse. Federal oversight had replaced the county's culture of fear. As Delaney walked the parking lot, she reflected on the fragile balance between power and responsibility. Every action, every abuse of authority had consequences, some immediate, others delayed but inevitable. Cedar Ridge had been a microcosm of unchecked power, and its exposure offered lessons that transcended county lines. Later, at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Delaney addressed a room of recruits, young faces bright with both hope and fear. The lights dimmed and the screen descended. She played grainy dash cam footage from Quill's stop, highlighting the arrogance, the threats, the abuse of constitutional authority. Silence fell over the room. Her voice carried over the audio, measured and unflinching. "This man believed the badge was his shield," she said. "He forgot that the badge belongs to the citizens." The slide changed to Quill's current state, hollowed, aged, restrained by federal custody. The lesson was clear. Loyalty is owed to the law, not to personal networks of power or fear. Young Agent sat rigid, absorbing the lesson. Delaney's eyes softened slightly as she concluded, "When you see a Harlon Quill, you do not look away. You act. Justice, delayed, must still arrive." Her lecture emphasized the weight of moral courage and the personal cost of inaction, a narrative framed by the events in Cedar Ridge that she had orchestrated with precision. Delaney's day at the FBI Academy concluded, but her mind remained tethered to Cedar Ridge. She returned to her office, the soft hum of the building punctuating her thoughts. Vance, her assistant, informed her of a visitor from the Texas State Board of Pardons regarding a compassionate release petition for Quill. She considered the file, recalling the terror in his eyes, the lives he had destroyed, and the meticulous cover-up he had orchestrated. Compassion, she knew, was earned, not granted. She denied the petition with a single deliberate stroke of her pen. Quill would remain in federal custody. Each decision she made reinforced the lesson she imparted to the recruits. Accountability was non-negotiable. As the day waned, she dialed her brother, Ronan. His voice brought a rare warmth to the sterile office. They made plans to visit his college campus, a small but meaningful victory amidst the chaos. The sunset cast long shadows over Quantico, a symbolic closure to the Cedar Ridge operation. Delaney allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. Justice had been methodical and complete. Quill had learned the consequences of his actions. His empire of fear dismantled, and the community could begin rebuilding. Yet she knew vigilance was never ending. Corruption lurked in shadows, waiting for moments of complacency. Today was a victory, but tomorrow would demand the same precision, courage, and unwavering commitment to the law that had carried her through the challenges of the Texas highways. The karma loop had closed. The wrongs committed were met with consequence, and Delaney Voss, ever watchful, ensured that the lessons of Cedar Ridge would resonate far beyond its dusty roads and shattered precincts. Back in Cedar Ridge, the remnants of the sheriff's network were being catalogued and processed. Delaney oversaw agents as they combed through evidence, uncovering decades of illicit activity, embezzlement, falsified reports, and hidden assets. Every confiscated ledger, every file pulled from the safe, told a story of abuse and betrayal. Delaney moved through the station with the precision of a field agent, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. Deputies who had been complicit now faced federal oversight, their authority stripped, their routines disrupted. It was a lesson in the permanence of accountability. Outside, the streets that had been battlegrounds for civil rights and civil obedience were now quiet. Citizens observed from a distance, witnessing the tangible consequences of corruption finally being addressed. Delaney paused at the edge of the lot, scanning the horizon where Interstate 10 cut across the landscape. The sun had risen fully now, illuminating the familiar roadside billboards that had once concealed predatory patrols. She thought about the young college students, contractors, and travelers who had been victimized. Each action of her team restored a measure of faith to the community. The tactile satisfaction of justice, the precision, the thoroughness, was a rare balm. Delaney understood that while one victory didn't erase the scars of systemic abuse, it could prevent the repetition of harm. As she coordinated the final transport of seized assets and the arrested deputies, she felt the weight of responsibility. The legacy of fear was ending, but the work to rebuild public trust had just begun. Every procedure, every report, would serve as a reference for future oversight and training. Delaney reflected on the subtle shift in power. Authority had to be tempered with accountability, and every badge carried a duty to the people. The county was quieter now, not because the threat had vanished completely, but because oversight had returned. Cedar Ridge was a case study in vigilance, in the necessity of proactive enforcement against abuses of power. Delaney's phone buzzed, a routine check-in from Quantico confirming the secure transfer of evidence and detainees. She allowed herself a brief smile. It was a rare victory, methodical and complete, yet it reminded her that justice was never static, only constantly earned. Her gaze swept over the now empty highway. envisioning a safer, fairer road for every traveler passing through this East Texas corridor. In the following days, Delaney Voss turned her focus to the human cost of the Cedar Ridge corruption. Families whose lives had been disrupted, college students whose trust in law enforcement had been shattered, and local business owners who had lost property or income were contacted and guided through restitution processes. Each case was painstakingly documented, the agents meticulous in their approach to ensure the federal response was transparent and thorough. Meanwhile, Harlon Quill's incarceration had begun to ripple outward. News outlets covered the operation, highlighting the fall of a lawman whose abuse of power had caused years of pain. Public discussion centered on systemic reform, the necessity of oversight, and the dangers of unchecked authority. Delaney reviewed reports in the temporary Cedar Ridge Command Center, her attention sharp, analyzing every document, every recorded confession, and every seized asset. Agents in the field continued to excavate Hale's property, uncovering hidden accounts, cash, and items of historical significance to the county's corruption history. Delaney also considered the broader message: corruption, even when entrenched and protected by fear, was not immune from exposure. The air in the county felt lighter as locals began to process the implications of federal oversight and accountability. Delaney spoke with Ronan over the phone, noting his calm but curious excitement about visiting his campus soon. It was a small but potent symbol that life could continue, that integrity had its rewards. As the sun dipped lower, Delaney walked the lot once more, observing traffic flow smoothly, unhindered by predatory tactics. The physical and symbolic structures of power had shifted. Cedar Ridge was quieter, safer, and more just. The ripple effects of her careful planning and decisive action were already evident, a testament to the impact one principled agent could have on a community long left to the mercy of corruption. By the time Delaney returned to Quantico, Cedar Ridge had been fundamentally transformed. The former sheriff's empire of fear had been dismantled, deputies reassigned or dismissed, and every asset seized for redistribution or evidence. Delaney reviewed the intelligence reports one last time, ensuring that no loose ends remained. She reflected on the careful orchestration, the precise timing of the arrests, the placement of agents, the collection of digital and physical evidence. Every decision had reinforced the lesson that power untempered by law leads to ruin. Meanwhile, Quill remained in the SHU at USP Beaumont, where solitude and the rigid regimen of federal custody stripped him of the vestiges of his former authority. Letters from family members had ceased. Isolation compounded his reflection. Delaney's phone buzzed with updates from the field team. The hidden lapel pin of Agent Barrett Kane, found in Hale's safe, was being logged as part of the ongoing investigation into past disappearances, a reminder that corruption often hides deeper sins beneath its surface. Delaney noted the importance of connecting these threads for historical record and future prosecutions. In her office, she held the pin briefly, feeling the cold metal, the weight of unsolved questions, and the lives affected. It was a symbol of both loss and the continuing pursuit of justice. She placed it carefully in evidence, a tangible reminder of the stakes in every operation. Her mind returned to the lecture hall at Quantico, to the faces of the recruits who had watched Quill's actions and their consequences on the screen. They needed to internalize the lessons of Cedar Ridge, the dangers of unchecked authority, and the moral courage required to confront it. The story of Quill, Hale, and the dismantling of Cedar Ridge's corruption was more than a case study. It was a warning and a guide for the next generation of federal agents. Delaney allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction before moving on to the next case, understanding that justice, while sometimes delayed, had tangible power when wielded with precision and integrity. Delaney reflected on the broader implications of Cedar Ridge as she reviewed the final reports from her field team. The sheriff's office had been stripped of corrupt influence, files were organized for federal scrutiny, and all involved personnel had been accounted for. Every transaction, every seized asset, and every confession was meticulously documented. Even the local citizens, once fearful of reporting abuse, began to feel a cautious relief. Federal oversight, Delaney understood, could restore trust when wielded with both precision and authority. In the quiet of her office, she reviewed the digital records from Quill's dashcam and Hale's hidden ledgers, noting the intricate web of abuse, favoritism, and intimidation. Each pattern revealed the systemic rot that had allowed corruption to flourish for decades. The evidence formed not just a case for prosecution, but a blueprint for reform, an instructive guide for other jurisdictions. Delaney scheduled meetings with new leadership in Cedar Ridge to implement long-term policies, accountability measures, body camera compliance, and mandatory reporting for misconduct. The ripple effects were already visible. Officers formerly complicit in wrongdoing were under strict supervision, community outreach programs were being established, and oversight protocols were being institutionalized. Delaney's mind shifted to Quill, now isolated in USP Beaumont. The justice system had delivered consequences commensurate with his actions. He was stripped of authority, family, and wealth, a complete dismantling of the life he had manipulated. Yet Delaney recognized the human element in every story she managed. Justice required empathy, context, and strategic patience. As she prepared to close her files and report to her superiors, she allowed herself a brief glance at the horizon outside her office window. The sun cast a soft glow over the campus of Quantico, symbolic of both closure and the continuing responsibility of law enforcement. Every choice she had made, every calculated risk, had preserved lives and reinforced the principle that power carries responsibility. Cedar Ridge was a case study in the consequences of moral failure, but also a testament to the enduring impact of decisive, principled action. Delaney's next assignment involved consolidating the lessons learned from Cedar Ridge into operational protocols. She held debriefings with her field team, reviewing every action, every decision, and every unforeseen outcome. Tactical decisions were analyzed, communication chains refined, and the chain of custody for evidence was reinforced. Delaney emphasized the psychological component of law enforcement, how authority can be misused, and how agents must maintain ethical vigilance. Her team discussed the repercussions of unchecked power, exploring the effects on communities and individuals alike. Meanwhile, in federal custody, Quill's reality settled in fully. The isolation and strict regiment of USP Beaumont stripped away any remaining delusions of influence. Letters from family were now memories. The life he had known was irrevocably altered. Delaney knew that while Quill would physically endure, the psychological consequences of his actions, compounded by his fall from authority, would be enduring. Back at Quantico, she prepared case studies for training purposes, ensuring future agents understood both the operational and moral complexities of investigations involving law enforcement corruption. Cedar Ridge served as a template, demonstrating the necessity of foresight, planning, and moral clarity. Every procedural decision she codified would inform the next generation of agents tasked with confronting corruption. Delaney's reflection was clear. Power, when unchecked, destroys both the wielder and the community. But principled action, grounded in law and ethics, can restore balance and trust, even after years of systemic abuse. The work was never complete, but Cedar Ridge was proof that decisive lawful intervention could produce enduring change. Delaney spent the next weeks synthesizing the Cedar Ridge operation into formal training material for the FBI. Each segment highlighted tactical precision, moral decision-making, and the importance of leveraging digital evidence. She annotated dashcam footage, documenting every infraction by Quill, and emphasized the importance of anticipating potential resistance from rogue officers. Reforms recommended included body camera compliance, oversight protocols, and mandatory reporting procedures. These measures aimed to prevent future abuses, embedding accountability at every level. Simultaneously, Quill remained in USP Beaumont, confined to the SHU. His health deteriorated slowly under the weight of isolation, and every day underscored the consequences of his decisions. Letters ceased, and his personal life unraveled. Divorce proceedings moved forward. Children severed ties and assets were liquidated to compensate victims. Delaney reviewed these outcomes in her office, understanding that while the legal consequences were clear, the societal and psychological repercussions were equally significant. Cedar Ridge became a living case study, a community scarred by corruption, then methodically restored by the precise application of law and oversight. Delaney reflected on her own role in the process, acknowledging the delicate balance between intervention and observation. The operation demonstrated that the careful application of strategy, morality, and law could dismantle entrenched corruption and restore faith in justice, but only when every action was deliberate and every consequence accounted for. Her work ensured that the lessons of Cedar Ridge would endure beyond the immediate arrests and convictions, shaping future operations and cultivating agents committed to the principle that authority is a responsibility, not a privilege. Delaney continued to monitor Cedar Ridge from a strategic distance, ensuring that the federal reforms were implemented effectively. Local law enforcement began reporting compliance with new oversight procedures, while body camera footage was reviewed systematically to prevent further misconduct. Community outreach programs were launched to rebuild trust, emphasizing transparency and accountability. Quill, confined in U.S. Beaumont, had become emblematic of the consequences of abusing authority. His days were regimented, his interactions limited, and the isolation underscored the moral and legal costs of his actions. Delaney also focused on training, incorporating real-world lessons from Cedar Ridge into simulations for new recruits. Each scenario emphasized the intersection of tactical decision-making and ethical responsibility. Dash-cam footage and seized evidence were dissected in controlled exercises, demonstrating how minute decisions could escalate into systemic corruption. The message was clear: vigilance, integrity, and adherence to law were non-negotiable. Delaney's reflections extended beyond operational procedures to the broader implications for public trust. The Cedar Ridge case exemplified the fragility of authority when power was unchecked and the strength of federal oversight when applied decisively. She noted that corruption, once entrenched, required both swift action and sustained vigilance to dismantle. By integrating these lessons into formal training, Delaney ensured that future agents would be equipped to recognize, confront, and neutralize abuses of power, reinforcing the principle that law enforcement exists to serve the public, not personal ambition or fear. Weeks passed, and Delaney Voss continued her oversight of Cedar Ridge, ensuring that the changes were sustainable. Community trust slowly rebuilt as citizens observed consistent law enforcement practices and transparent reporting. New deputies were trained in ethical decision-making, body camera compliance, and public accountability. Delaney coordinated with local leaders, reinforcing the principles of fairness and integrity. Quill, still confined in U.S. Beaumont, grappled with the reality of his downfall. His isolation was punctuated by the harsh reminder of the consequences of exploiting authority, while his health and family life deteriorated. Delaney's attention shifted between operational logistics, training programs, and strategic planning for future interventions. Each file reviewed, every report analyzed, served as a reinforcement of lessons learned. Authority must be exercised with responsibility, corruption must be challenged decisively, and the public's trust is both fragile and paramount. Cedar Ridge had become a blueprint for systemic reform, demonstrating how law, ethics, and precise intervention could restore justice to communities long under the shadow of abuse. Delaney organized a final sweep of Cedar Ridge's records, ensuring all remaining corrupt activities were documented and addressed. She met with community leaders to assess the impact of the reforms, listening to feedback and adjusting oversight procedures. Transparency became a priority, with regular updates shared publicly to rebuild confidence. Quill's absence from the community served as a cautionary tale, reinforcing that accountability is inevitable. At Quantico, Delaney prepared comprehensive reports and training modules based on the Cedar Ridge case, emphasizing the importance of planning, ethics, and decisive action in confronting corruption. Each module incorporated real scenarios, illustrating the consequences of failing to act against abuses of power. Agents were trained not only in tactical skills, but also in moral judgment and public accountability, ensuring that future interventions would prevent the recurrence of similar systemic failures. The work was methodical, deliberate, and intended to leave a lasting impact on both law enforcement culture and public trust. Delaney reviewed every aspect of Cedar Ridge one last time, confirming the structural reforms were in place. Oversight mechanisms were established, body cameras functioning, and reporting protocols monitored. The community, once intimidated, now engaged with law enforcement with cautious optimism. Delaney ensured that deputies understood the importance of accountability, and she instituted periodic evaluations to prevent the re-emergence of corruption. Training programs at Quantico incorporated these lessons, preparing agents for the complex moral and tactical challenges they would face in the field. Quill's presence loomed as a stark reminder of the consequences of abusing power, reinforcing the principle that authority is a responsibility, not a privilege. Each report, each recorded interview, and each procedural update ensured that Cedar Ridge's transformation was durable. The county could now function with integrity, transparency, and public trust, and Delaney had established a model that would inform future federal oversight operations. The conclusion of the Cedar Ridge case was marked by reflection and accountability. Delaney Voss ensured that every policy change, oversight mechanism, and reform was documented and sustainable. Training programs integrated the lessons learned, emphasizing ethical responsibility, tactical precision, and the necessity of upholding public trust. The community had begun to heal, trust was cautiously rebuilding, and law enforcement practices were transparent and accountable. Harlon Quill remained in federal custody, serving as a powerful reminder that abuse of authority carries irrevocable consequences. Delaney continued to mentor and instruct, using Cedar Ridge as a case study in both tactical operation and moral responsibility. The ripple effect of justice, carefully executed, had restored integrity to a county long dominated by corruption. In her office at Quantico, Delaney looked out at the American flag waving in the courtyard. Her brother Ronan called, and she smiled, planning a visit to his college campus. The story of Cedar Ridge had closed. Power misused had been corrected, victims had been acknowledged, and systemic reform had been achieved. Justice, delayed but inevitable, had arrived. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.